Well, today I have the challenge of introducing someone whose own grandmother once said, quote, "Rick doesn't have a temper, but that boy sure does have a mean streak." I've known Rick since we worked together on the Bush Quail '88 presidential campaign here in Florida when I was just 10 years old, and we've certainly come a long way. Rick's gone from working for a president to being on special lists made up by a president. His company, Intrepid Media, has served hundreds of clients, state parties, the national committees, super PACs, corporate and association clients. He's covered it all since its founding. So, many of the Tiger Bay membership here today can thank properly, or not, Rick Wilson for his years of service in electing Republicans to office. He probably looks familiar to you if you watch MSNBC on a regular basis, and you might have seen him just last night on CNN talking all things Trump, and that effort requires special outreach beyond the confines of cable television. He's probably most well known on Twitter, his handle at @TheRickWilson, where he has a following of more than 220,000. And he's tweeted nearly 250,000 times. That certainly catches the attention of leaders around the world, some more than others. One fat kid in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea noted that Rick recently changed his social media profile photo to a book cover entitled "Fallout Protection: What to Do and Know About a Nuclear Attack." In fact, Rick reached out to his Twitter followers this week asking for comments and suggestions on his speech topic today, the future of the Republican Party. Well, you can imagine the responses. Everything from, well, this should be a very short speech, to the memes of fire-breathing dragons scorching the earth a la Game of Thrones. During the 2016 election, Rick was a very early adopter of the Never Trump movement, a collection of political activists, most with an R after their name, who have vowed never to cast a vote for Donald Trump under any circumstances. In one column last fall, Rick wrote, "I will never vote for Donald Trump, not even if Ronald Reagan and William F. Buckley rise from the grave and beg me to support him." So you're saying there's a chance. Okay. He describes himself as GOP media guy, dad, husband, pilot, hunter, writer. I make ads and do politics. Columnist for the Daily Beast, enemy of the state, never out of the fight. And on one personal online profile, quote, "I say things on television you write about later." He's funny, he's angry, he's tweeting about all of you right now, and he's with us here today. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Rick Wilson.
Because ad-libbing is bad, it gets me in trouble. So good afternoon. As Christina mentioned, she was just, I thought you might have been in your very early teens during the 1988 campaign.
Thank you, Rick.
You know, we've been around the block a few times. Oops. Like a pro. Anyway, some of you know me as that rare bald dude with big ears on TV who says appropriate things at high speed. Some of you know me from various campaigns around Florida. Some of you know me as the guy walking around the Killearn Publix yelling into my phone about media buys. Some of you are among my 200,000-ish Twitter followers, and for that I apologize. It's a high volume feed, and there are times when you look at it, I could have been Proust and written 4 or 5 novels out of that volume of tweets. Notoriously blunt. I'm pretty much way too outspoken for my own good. My language is a little too colorful for PG TV sometimes. I've occasionally had producers yelling into my earpiece during shows, "Oh my God, what did you just say?" I'll try to avoid that today, at least till the end of the Q&A section, because then it's going to get feisty. But it's a privilege to speak to the Capital Bay Tiger Bay Club today, because you guys have drawn an audience of colorful political figures in a state that doesn't lack for colorful political figures. And the discourse here and the questions here are always of a high caliber, and you guys are engaged in politics, and I think that is something that our country and our state really needs to stay focused on as we go forward. So, as Christina said, my job is to help candidates and corporations and associations and super PACs get their message out. It's pretty simple. I do a lot of writing for these folks. I do a lot of trying to help them craft a message that works and gets out and is persuasive. I'm sort of politics famous. You know, politics is fame for ugly people. I'm politics famous for making a lot of really controversial negative television ads over the years, for which it used to be the Democrats really hated me for, and now it's the Trump people who really hate me for that. So it's an interesting sort of spot to be in. You know, most of my TV ads they do end up being competitive, and as one person one time said to me, he goes, you know, I look at your ads and I think the candidates that you're running them against must be saying, Google, how can I get in the witness protection program? So, yeah, but I live and breathe politics, and I have for a long time in a way that makes most people encourage me to seek other hobbies other than overthrowing governments and venting my spleen every day. But, you know, it's a privilege to do what I do. It's a job that I've loved my entire career. I've worked in 39 states, run ads in 39 states, worked on projects across the country. I'm a Florida guy, born in Tampa, went to school in D.C., came back to D.C. after the Bush campaign here, came back to Florida. We had a couple of stops in New York along the way when I worked for Giuliani during the 90s and early 2000s. But Florida's home, and we made Tallahassee our home since '94. But despite this lifetime of being in Republican politics, despite this entire career built around one party and the conservative ideals that inform that one party, I'm kind of in new political territory lately. You know, so I was a rock-solid party guy for decades, and that stretches back to the '88 campaign, where, you know, the first time I got a paycheck from a campaign was 1988, and I have been a relentless, staunch defender of my party, often right, often wrong, and even in the worst of possible times. But I've had a kind of political midlife change. Now, a lot of guys who hit their sort of political midlife change go out and get a 25-year-old girlfriend, a sports car, and a hair transplant. I have done none of those, obviously the latter being very clearly evident. But last year, instead of towing the party line and lining up behind the Republican nominee and being a good soldier, I decided that my principles and my country were above my party and my politics. And I'm proud to say, although it has caused a tremendous amount of controversy and a burden on my family and my friends and my clients occasionally, I was one of the founders of the Never Trump movement. I'm sure there are some Trump fans in the audience, and for that I apologize, because the rest of the ride gets a little uglier from here. As a Republican, as a conservative, and as an American, I just couldn't do it. I just could not bring myself to pretend that Donald Trump was a conservative or that he was a Republican. And ironically, for a sort of cold-hearted political operative, I felt like he lacked the moral and personal character to be in charge of the federal government and the 330 million people in this country, and in charge of nuclear weapons, and in charge of things that are consequential for the future of our nation and the lives of our citizens. It was a moment where I just couldn't see this country in Donald Trump's hands. His tiny, 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 lemur-sized hands. So how far did I go off the Republican reservation? Pretty far. I'm still a registered Republican. I, however, helped run an independent bid for president because I and many other conservatives looked at Trump over and over again, and just the temptation of selecting somebody who was unfit for the office, but he didn't have the last name Hillary Clinton, was a powerful one. But we had to offer people something different. We had to offer people something that was a principled conservative option. It may have been the longest of long shots, and it sure was. Didn't win a damn state. Didn't even come in first in any states. We did, however, get more votes in a single state than any Republican or any independent candidate in modern history. But, you know, we were running a campaign that was based on some more fundamental American principles that had disappeared from the dialogue of the Republican nominee. You know, things like liberty and equality and the rule of law and reverence for the Constitution. You know, the old-fashioned stuff we used to talk about. You know, I didn't make that choice lightly or trivially. I wasn't alone in understanding there were two elections going on in 2016. The first one that everybody noticed was the usual political frame. It was Hillary versus Donald, Republican versus Democrat. Everybody understands that frame. These ideological lanes in our country are very, very well understood. They're clearly delineated. We all get that kind of dialogue. We've seen that political battle 100 times. So we can set aside for a minute that election. Why she lost, he won. Those are interesting questions, but that election wasn't the most consequential. The real election in 2016 was for the heart and soul of the Republican Party. Republicans were hypnotized by a celebrity con man with a nationalist message who was given virtually unlimited media attention. And because of that, infrastructure of media that just blocked out the sun for every other candidate, GOP primary voters slowly but surely killed off a field of incredibly talented, conservative Republican candidates. Some of them were more talented than others. Some of them made better decisions than others. All of them were defeated by a man not worthy to shine their shoes. Republican voters had a choice between Trump's troll party and the grand old party that we all knew. And they chose the troll party. It's easy to make an argument that that was the death of the modern Republican Party. Sure, we have the House, we have the Senate, we have a friendly Supreme Court. But this party has lost its way and lost its soul. And we were flawed. It was a flawed party. We were never perfect. Whether you were a Republican or a Democrat, nobody's going to make an argument that the GOP was perfect. We had good years and we had terrible years. We elected presidents. We lost presidencies. We took back Congress. We lost Congress. We took back Congress again. Our leaders ranged from terrible to extraordinary. And through it all, though, there was one truth. There was one thing that kept people like me working every day for the Republican Party. And that was that it was the only party that was even vaguely amenable to limited government conservatism and to some adherence to the Constitution over the societal preferences of any given moment, and to the constraints of power of the government over its citizens that our founding fathers cherished. All those things didn't have a home anywhere else. And the difficulty of watching Trump take over the Republican Party and the virus of Trumpism and the nationalist populism of Trumpism take over the GOP was that the first thing to go were those principles. We never got home on delivering a lot of those things, but it was a long march and a slow march, and we were working toward it. And now those things are in the rearview mirror. And so the GOP, as we knew it, was nice while it lasted. You know, Donald Trump, he put the Republican Party in a much different frame, but he also put the conservative movement at risk because we abandoned those principles. So even instead of leaders of stature and judgment and philosophical orientation toward conservatism, we now have a bellowing billionaire who has poor impulse control and an itchy Twitter finger. He is a man who is ideologically unmoored. He doesn't believe in anything except himself, his celebrity, and his brand. That's not the party I signed up for. The troll party's got this nationalist, anti-establishment, reflexive anti-establishment bluster, and they believe that that is much more important than the Constitution and the rule of law. They've moved into a zone where the things that define a Republican and a conservative are now defined by, do you wear the right colored hat? And do you yell MAGA loud enough at the rally? So I stood up and I spoke out. I found myself with a lot of new friends, a lot of new enemies, including that guy that wears the exotic hair hat and has the stubby little fingers. I will tell you, one of the most amazing experiences you can have in your life is when Donald Trump tweets something terrible about you. Wow. The world changes right overnight, and you learn very quickly who your friends and your enemies are. But anyway, look, nobody thought this guy could win. Even his own campaign staff on election night were calling reporters saying, "It's over, we're doomed." They didn't think he would win. They never prepared for this, and it really shows. It really shows now in ways that I hope in the future we're going to look at candidates a little more closely and say, do they have the character and the standing and the moral and the intellectual and the mental framework to be able to do this job? Because right now, a lot of people are realizing you kind of don't in this president. You know, I don't want to go all esoteric on you for a minute, but the philosopher Immanuel Kant says that there are two realities. There's the phenomenon, which is the unreal which is seen. That was the 26th campaign at the top. And the noumenon, which is the unseen which is real. And that noumenon, that change in the Republican Party is really what has sort of absorbed my thinking in the last year and a half, and why I'm still fighting to try to get the Republican Party and the conservative movement back reoriented towards what it can and should and does believe and represent. So here we are as a party, sort of hostages to fortune on the Trump train. And look, guys, we'll debate for a generation whether Donald Trump should have an asterisk after his name because of the interference and the games that Russia played in this election. We're going to debate that for a generation. And Robert Mueller might have some things to say on that, which could change the game rather dramatically in the near future. But I want to talk for a second, not that I'm just a critic of my party, I want to talk a little bit, and we'll get to Florida in a second, because that's when it's going to get lit. Neither party is ready for the future. Both parties right now, and the 2016 in a weird way, the top level election in a weird way, was so about the past for both parties, and so about an America that's disappeared or disappearing for both parties, that it really is a striking warning sign that neither party is aware or ready or able to face the incredibly consequential choices and changes that are coming at us. There are going to be radical alterations in America's political landscape in the next few years that will make the last 10 years look like the 1950s for stability. The changes that are going to redefine policy and politics in this country are marked by this accelerating cycle of political and social and economic change in this country. And it's not just the speed of the change, it's the rate at which the change is coming at us. This accelerating change arc happens in technology all the time. You know, the cell phone in your pocket that 20 years ago was a supercomputer that cost millions and millions of dollars. Politics is about to do the same exact thing. All these political forms and lessons we used to have. I mean, look, the campaigns we ran in the 2000s and the 90s looked a lot, you know, maybe better technology, but looked a lot message-wise like the campaigns from the 70s and 80s and 60s. They were still about these big, simple, you know, left versus right paradigms. And, you know, we want either economic freedom or more government control. All these things that looked like they were locked in stone aren't, because neither party is ready for the fact that technology is going to blow out the vast majority of white-collar jobs. And technology is going to blow out the vast majority of blue-collar jobs. Anything that can be digitized, studied, and programmed is going to be digitized, studied, and programmed. That includes people that think right now that they're in the secure upper middle class. All you lawyers out here are in for it. Artificial intelligence is going to alter things in ways that we haven't even anticipated. And neither party is offering an economic vision of the future that really gets to that. Neither party is right now saying, you know, we get what's coming, we're preparing for what's coming, we're making the economic and policy and social changes that are necessary for that. Neither party is ready for the changes in things like healthcare and transportation and energy that are inevitably going to wash over us. And we are right now stuck in this 1990s model where the Democrats are like, well, we just know enough regulation, we can handle all this. And Republicans are like, if we just kill enough regulation, we can handle all this. Neither one of them is ready for it. And people distrust parties for two reasons. One, because politicians are terrible at telling the truth and keeping their promises. That's a fundamental. But two, because they increasingly sense that politics is disconnected from things that affect their daily lives. They increasingly sense that politics isn't handling the problems that are in front of them every day. They sense it. I mean, the healthcare fight is a proxy for this in ways that we can hardly even touch. You know, the terror among people that a pre-existing condition is going to wreck their family or wreck their finances forever is something that Republicans didn't get. We saw it back in 2009 in focus groups. Democrats don't get that a large government institution running healthcare also terrifies the hell out of Americans. Nobody's ready to get out of their partisan lanes and get into the actual discussions we need to be having. So this whole radical disintermediation and technological change for the parties is something that no one's ready for. No one's got a handle on that. And you know, it would seem to me, and call me crazy, having two functional, thoughtful political parties in this country, at least, thinking about those changes and working to build some sort of political consensus in a very divided nation would make sense. Perhaps not. You know, the drama may be more fun for both sides. For my party, it seems like we're failing the future test because we're looking backward, we're looking inward, and honestly, if the last 5 days doesn't convince you that the GOP are looking like jackasses, nothing will. This is a bad time to be a Republican. It has fundamentally changed the character of my party, And I have to call out not just Donald Trump right now, but leaders of my party who will not call Donald Trump out by name for what he's done and said in the last few days to give aid and comfort to Nazis and Klansmen and racists. So we're going to get more on that in a few minutes here. So one of the reasons that I find this such a sharp contrast is that, as Christina mentioned, we came up in H.W. Bush's Republican Party. I had the honor to work as a very junior appointee for this guy named Dick Cheney when he was Secretary of Defense. And we understood that George Herbert Walker Bush had set a tone in that administration. He expected everybody, from his cabinet members down to the most junior guys, to represent the values that he brought to that office of modesty and humility and judgment and humanity and service. Those things have been replaced in my party right now with anger and corruption and venality and a sense of division that we have never experienced in this country since the 1960s civil rights riots. I'm not putting too fine a point to say that the party that was founded as an anti-slavery party in a schoolhouse in Ripon, Michigan is no longer in charge of the ideological legacy of that. I mean, I look back and I think about, what would Lincoln or Calvin Coolidge or Ronald Reagan or William F. Buckley or any of the leaders or thinkers in this party do if confronted with the idea that we are replacing the Republican Party with a roaring and angry mob and one roaring and angry man the color of a tangerine running it. I think that, I have imagined Lincoln reaching for an axe handle and Reagan for a bullwhip and Buckley for the most poison pen he could offer. These people would not tolerate this man, not for one hot second. So in the last few days, as I've mentioned, we have entered one of those darkest and disheartening times that I've seen in my political life. And you know exactly what I'm talking about. It is about race, and it is about a reality. And the reality is that Donald Trump, as people like to say frequently, is not like any other Republican politician in generations. They're absolutely right, and that is not a compliment. Dwight Eisenhower nationalized the National Guard in Arkansas so that black children could attend Little Rock High School. Sorry. Donald Trump retweets people named White Genocide TM. Richard Nixon stood in Harlem and said, "This country cannot bear the burden of segregation." Donald Trump took 2 days to denounce Nazis. Ronald Reagan made a fiery, angry denunciation of the Klan. He didn't mince words or draw false moral equivalencies. He said it flat out. We don't want your support. Trump says the protesters confronting the Klan and the alt-right and the Nazis in Charlottesville are morally equivalent to the people protesting them. When George H.W. Bush learned that David Duke was running for a statewide office in Louisiana, he didn't wait. He didn't say there was another side to the argument. He dispatched dozens and dozens of Republican field operatives to work to elect a Democrat instead of David Duke. Trump took weeks to denounce Duke back in 2016, and he still struggles to clearly and unequivocally do the one thing that every American politician should do, and that is to put racists and hate groups on blast every day. Not spinning your wheels, not trying to play both sides, not trying to dog whistle people. Go at them, destroy them. That's what we do to racists in this country. That's what we do to Nazis in this country. That's what we do to fascists and anti-Semites in this country. That's the correct response. He won't make it. In a move that surprised and heartened me in the last few days, almost every Republican politician in this country has had a sharp shock. They've had a wake-up call. They've come right out and they've said, not us, not this, and not you, Mr. President. The number of people that have rejected the way he's handled this is growing by the minute. The anger among Republican elected officials that I've spoken to at the U.S. Senate level, the governor level, the congressional level is astounding. They have recognized finally that this is a man who is off the rails. They're not unclear about it. They're not playing games about it. They're calling out Nazis and the Klan and the alt-right for what they are. Unacceptable. They are not a part of American political society. They're not a part of American political life. And anybody that doesn't have the guts and the moral principles to stand up and oppose them shouldn't be one of them. If the Republican Party doesn't do this to Trump, he's going to keep dog whistling to these people. He's going to keep rubbing elbows with these people. He's going to keep the people on his staff that are the ambassadors from the alt-right, Steve Bannon, Stephen Miller, Julia Hahn, Seb Gorka, these folks who want to have a nationalist populist race division in this country. These are people who aggressively and assertively seek to divide us by race. And if the elected representatives in the Republican Party don't stand up to this, they're going to lose their moral standing, and they deserve to lose their offices if they don't stand up and speak out vocally about this consistently. So, I'm going to just go ahead and we're going to move on to the future of the two parties, because this critical moment, this emotional moment, oh yeah, I get a little hot about this stuff, I apologize, is straining both parties, and that inability to see the future coming at them is straining both parties. And both of the parties have drawn themselves into these increasingly isolated silos, where Republicans don't talk to Republicans and Democrats don't talk to Democrats, and we stopped believing we're Americans and started believing we're only defined by partisan anger and fury. And I think that both parties, we're down to the point now where we're debating basic concepts like truth. And that's not where America goes forward. That's where America gets stuck. Democrats are on this collision course with the older, more traditional operative wing of their party. That the part that elected Bill Clinton and Barack Obama and won seats years and years and years. And this, they were liberal to be very sure, but they sort of existed in the political homeostasis of American politics. They weren't that far out to the crazy left, and they weren't that divorced from the fact that not all of America is San Francisco or Manhattan. But now there's this emergent sort of populist wing, the Bernie, Elizabeth Warren wing of the party, and they're a much more progressive, much more avowedly socialist kind of wing of the party, and they're going to do great in a national election in 6 or 8 states, and then they're going to get their head handed to them everywhere else. The Democrats right now are a party with every chance to score a touchdown, but they can't put the right players out on the field. But and my critiques of the Republican Party you've heard, but with both of these parties sort of mired in this political pathology and this isolation between their voters and the rest of the country, we may see schisms in the nation where we end up with a viable 3rd or 4th party. We may end up with a progressive Bernie party that actually starts getting numbers. We may end up with a traditional Democratic Party. We may end up with a Trumpist national populist party, and we may end up with the Republican Party divorcing the alt-righters and the crazy people and the folks that believe that this country should be run on racial lines, and go back to the limited government model. It's hard for anybody to get to 270 in a presidential election, but the strains on all these parties are filling the independent space like nothing before. In almost every state in the country that keeps voter files based on party, the fastest growing groups are non-party affiliated, by far, by leaps and bounds. There are more non-party affiliated people register here in a month than in a quarter for the GOP or the Democrats as a general rule. It is a high-speed change happening in our society and our politics that we haven't fully recognized yet. And it's one thing that's, like I said, drawing these two parties into a zone where independents might end up with a lot more power and a lot more lift. So let's move a little closer to home. And Florida is home base, always has been. I've done the majority of my work here over the years. But we have a generation of Republican dominance in the House and the Senate. And that generation of dominance is going to face a couple of big forces coming in the near future. The first is redistricting, and the second is demographics. By 2020, the population of Florida, by the way, just a fun fact, will have aged so much that only a handful of people will have cast a vote for Ronald Reagan in the state at that point. 5th generations like Floridians like me are about as rare as the skunk ape. But when it comes to Florida, I think the famous quote from William Gibson is always apropos. The future is here. It's not just evenly distributed yet. We're this laboratory for the country with all the demographic and social trends that hit us and hit the national political climate. They hit us sooner, they hit us harder, and they hit us weirder than anywhere else. We ride bigger economic waves than other states. We crash even harder. Like cocaine, Florida is a hell of a drug. We grow fast, we age fast, we push and pull at the edges of all these social issues. We make most melting pots look as white as Bismarck, North Dakota. We're more liberal, we're more conservative, we're more left, we're more right, and we're way, way more weird than the average state. We're always stumbling into this future that no one fully anticipates and eventually includes a story about an alligator and a meth lab and somebody somewhere eating somebody's face. It never fails to amuse and amaze. So one thing we know about the GOP controlling Florida politics for a generation is that we're really good at it. We are really good at winning elections. There are candidates and consultants in the state who are really good at this work. And the dominance of our party, as I said, is rested on two big factors. One, the redistricting factor. We've been very good about doing that over the generations that we've had control here. Now, because of a couple court decisions and a couple of ballot initiatives, the redistricting system is going to change here and things are going to get a lot more competitive in the future. Drawing those lines, we can debate, as we used to do, how many voters you can draw onto the head of a pin, but we're going to end up in a state where there are more competitive seats in the 2020 cycle than there have been in a long, long time. The second reason the Republicans have been dominant is the Democratic Party here is terrible at politics. I mean, they are just god-awful, and it's just a hard fact. You know, yes, Barack Obama won statewide here twice. Shout out to my buddy Steve Shale. God bless you guys. But that wasn't most Florida Democrats, unfortunately for your party. Other than Bill Nelson, you haven't had a statewide official since 2011, and the last Democratic governor left office in 1999, and no, Charlie Crist does not count. They're good in little doses, they're good in some places, they're good where the demographics are right, but as a holistic statewide political operation, they're just objectively terrible, and they're broke. And that, by the way, when the redistricting hits, that may change for the Democrats a little bit. They may have some resources they haven't had in a long time. And the army of lobbyists over there a couple blocks away that routinely write checks for the Republicans and starve out the Democrats, the minute the Democrats get even close in one of the houses, the money equation starts to shift. The minute they tie up one of the houses, and it's not impossible they'll take the Senate at some point or tie the Senate at some point in the future, then that money flow starts to be more competitive and things start to change. So we've got to get, as a party, get our head on straight to remain competitive for the things that are coming at us in the future, because redistricting and demographics and money level the playing field in ways that circumstance does not. So speaking of Bill Nelson, there's a real question if Rick Scott can beat him. I'll say this, Bill Nelson is the singularly most lucky man in Florida politics. He has drawn opponents time after time that I swear he must have paid them to be in the race. Catherine Harris, for God's sakes. Connie Mack, the 17th. God bless them. They may have whatever sterling qualities they may have. And I love Big Connie, but these folks were perfect foils for Bill Nelson. Now, Rick Scott is a relentlessly disciplined candidate. He is a man who is never off message, including, honey, can you take out the garbage? We're talking about jobs, honey. You know, this is a guy who never gets off message. He's a very disciplined candidate. He's proven to be very good at his work. He can also spend the gross national product of Belgium against Nelson in the thing. Now, Bill Nelson has a zillion% name ID. He doesn't scare people. He knows how to run. But of course, Bill Nelson's first campaign was during the Spanish-American War, so it's going to be a little bit more of a challenge than his normal efforts. You can expect one thing though from this campaign. You can expect to see so many television ads, and so many online ads, and hear so many radio ads, and have your phone called so many times by robos that you will beg for the sweet release of death. So there's some other statewide festivities coming. And the race that I think most people are more interested in and obsessed about lately is the GOP primary field. Now has enough people in it to comprise the average rifle squad in the Army. And it's flavored by a whole lot of Trumpism. All of these guys that are in the race so far, except for the guy who announced today, Jack LaValla, are pretty much on board the Trump train to Trash Fire Mountain. And these primary guys are all thinking to themselves, I'm going to be the most Trump. I'm going to be mini-me. And I get it. Primaries matter, and this state foolishly eliminated runoffs, which I thought were fun and funny, but the primaries matter, and these guys have all got consultants right now who are tempting them with the sugar high of Trumpism. They're looking at the polls and saying, man, look at the base number, look at the base number. Absolutely true in the primary, I get it. But to my friends running for governor, and I know all these guys, it's a field of talented, smart people, they really are. But I would encourage you guys to consider a few points. If you think Florida has a base-only win condition in the general election, I remind you that 50% of the people in Florida live in 10 largely urban counties. General election. Keep saying those words to yourself. Non-party voters and Hispanics, fastest growing group of demos in the state. How are those people doing with Donald Trump? Take a look at some polling outside the base. Think about the general. And how much is it going to cost you in a state that is definitively purple to swing back into the center-right lane after you get all MAGA, yeehaw, hold my beer for the entire course of the primary? Second question to ask yourself is, where's Trump going to be in 2018? Where are his numbers going to be in 2018? Because there's one thing we know about presidents. Once those numbers are down at a certain threshold, short of some major externality, it's real hard to get them back. You know, there are 1,000 contingencies and externalities that you could draw out that have Donald Trump's number dipping to where the lowest possible threshold is. And you can tell where the lowest possible party support threshold is by the strongly support number in a general approval. Right now, that's at about 27%. There are a couple theoretical models that show it about 23, 24%. How do you get home in a general election if you are defined and marked by that, and no one else in the world likes that kind of theory and that kind of philosophy that is definitional Trumpism? You know, in 2006, right down to local races, Democrats were running ads, and it was like, John Smith says he'll represent us on the local mosquito control board, but Republican John Smith supports George Bush. And in 2006, ads like that were everywhere, and they were deadly. They just beat us silly. We lost seats all over this country in 2006, specifically because the President of the United States was involved in an unpopular war, and the economy was in the dumper, and we were in a situation where George Bush was political poison. That could happen again today. In 1974, the Republican Party, well, actually, let's run it this way. In 1973, the Republican Party was shoulder to shoulder with Richard Nixon the entire way. They were like, this is all just a trivial thing, it's going to pass, he's fine. In 1974, the Democrats were pounding them silly with ads saying, Republicans support corrupt President Richard Nixon. Republicans that year lost 49 House seats and 8 Senate seats. Not a pretty picture. So the political climate for an unpopular president with numbers in the 20s or low 30s is always risky for these guys. The other thing about trying to be Trump is you're not. And I've had this conversation with actually 2 of the candidates. You're not Trump. You can't be Trump. You can't rub up against him and get all that screw you swagger that he has. You don't get to play the role of the iconoclastic reality TV star. You are not a reality TV show host for decades in a country that really, really knows a lot more about the Real Housewives of Wakulla and the Kardashians than they do about actual American political life and of actual political figures. You're not a celebrity. He gets away with it because, as he famously said, when you're a celebrity, they'll let you do anything. You haven't run a branding company dedicated to your own image for decades. Maybe Latino has, but you know. All of you, though, all these Republican candidates, they came from a more grounded and truly conservative Republican tradition that's dominated our politics in Florida. But right now, I can tell you, and you can see some of the outside signs, most of these candidates running for governor, their consultants are looking at that Trump base approval number and encouraging these guys to get an orange wig and to rage tweet every morning at 6 a.m. It's a really bad look on most people. You know, trying to out-Trump Trump is the biggest sin in politics. It's trying to be something you're just not. And most of these guys understand that imitating Trump, honestly, it's the fake orgasm of politics, okay? It may sound dramatic, it may sound great, but once your partner figures it out, man, things are going to be rough. It is not pretty. And these people know that you're not Trump. They know you're faking it. Be real, guys. Be yourselves. Be better than Trumpism. You'll thank me in the general election, I promise you. You know, as Republican elected officials in the country are discovering, the Trump base likes Trump. They don't like Republicans. They're not Republicans behaviorally. The Venn diagram may overlap, but most of them don't like Republicans at all. They're mad at Republicans. They think they failed to do all the magic that they want that Fox tells them they can do. So they like that spectacle and the populist red meat and all the scenery tearing and the monkey throwing its feces in the zoo stuff. They love all that. None of these candidates pull that off very well. None of them really play that role. There is not a fire-breathing nut job among them. Well, maybe. Like I said, there are no Trump Republicans. There's only Trump. You know, when you have a political movement, it says something and means something. And a political movement ends up in a situation where people aren't just following one man. They're not just following one person. In '94, during the Contract with America, people weren't out running as, I'm a Newt Gingrich Republican. No, they were running as a Contract with America Republican. In 2010, when the Tea Party helped take Congress back, they weren't running as, I'm a Sarah Palin Republican. They were running as, I'm a Tea Party Republican. I'm a limited government conservative. All those things are about an affiliation with an ideological movement. There is no ideological movement underpinning Trumpism except for celebrity and alienation and fury. That's not a movement. That's a man and his mob. On the plus side, these candidates, most of them aren't narcissistic sociopaths, which is a plus. Anyway, the other problem with rubbing up too close on Trump is you inherit a lot of his problems. And Republicans are learning this week, because of the meltdown we're having right now about race in this country that has been fomented by this president and this White House, that you inherit problems and you become associated with problems of the people that you follow and that you influence. And none of these people have understood the moral dimension of this, I think, until this week, and the concerns about it this week. And none of these people have been propelled through life and gotten away with time after time after time things that they've had to have lawyers step in and fix, and they've managed to detonate their way out of controversy and trouble and lies with this volcano of BS that gets them to a new level of controversy and trouble and lies. None of these guys can handle that. That's not the way you can run if you're any of these people, and behaviorally or emotionally or psychologically. So just don't be Trump's mini-me. Just a simple rule. I like to joke that being a Trump acolyte is like being the #2 man in Al-Qaeda. It may look great on your business card for a little while, but you know there's a bomb going off someday in your neighborhood. Anyway, even after all this, folks, and I'll wrap this up with some questions, I still believe that the party of Lincoln, at its heart, is better than its leadership today. I still believe the ideas of limited government and personal liberty and free markets and the rule of law and adherence to the Constitution deserve a party that champions them. I just hope that's the Republican Party I grew up in. Thanks so much for having me today. I'm happy to answer any questions.